And I wouldn't want to live anyplace else right now. I would have been happy all the time, you know what I mean? Some of them would talk, ghost town, this is a ghost town, and where you live in Nema, that ghost town, boy, that'd make me mad. I say, hey, there's a lot worse places, and I'm always happy in Nema.
If the ghosts in Nema today outnumber the people, if the empty lots and rotting frames outnumber the homes, it has not always been that way. No, there was a time when Nema roared, when the sawmill never stopped and smoke always billowed from the massive sawdust burner. There was a time when it seemed the timber would last forever. Scores of children ran up and down the streets, and every house had a white picket fence. There was a time.
And they had so many people in that gymnasium dancing to a name band from Green Bay that they caved in one end of the whole gymnasium floor. The floor went down about 2 feet to one whole end of it. There was that many people there.
You not only waited in line, but on Saturday night, you got a shave, see? And that lasted all week. That's 35 cents.
Buy a fifth of whiskey, you know. We go to Skanava, 99 cents. And then they have a party for the weekend. Each group would do that, wouldn't they, Hazel? For 99 cents,
don't give all of our good times away.
There are no more good times, no more shaves, no more Saturday nights. The lounges in the club are empty, the soda fountain unused, the bowling lanes are warped, and there is no one left to set the pins. There was a time when 1,500 people worked in the mill and in the woods, families living simple lives along the shore of Michigan's Upper Peninsula. Today the mill is gone, and only a handful of weathered souls remain, those who still remember.
We'd go on the train. The men would leave us off where the berries were, raspberries or blueberries or whatever, pick all day long. Then they'd pick us up and bring us home.
And I used to run from school to go up to the hospital to do the dishes that was left from the day, and that was my enjoyment when I was a kid.
You were a housewife.
To these kids, the world was filled with promise. Out with Dad on a Saturday morning, the Cub Scouts were planting the same pines that gave birth to Nema and sustained the Badenoch Lumber Company. Badenoch would own everything, the houses, the club, the streets. For 70 years, the people, the town, and the company survived together. But on this Saturday, it was too late. One July day in 1951, the trees would all be gone, and the mill would shut down. In the company store, the lumberjack's wool would gather dust. Housewives would no longer stop to chat, or children to buy a penny's worth of candy. Nema may have died that day 40 years ago, but in many ways she had been dying since the day she was born, the day the first log was cut.
I ain't got no home, I'm just a roaming round, just a wandering worker, I go from town to town. And the police
I started as a water boy.
From gopher to plant superintendent, Frank Sefcik would spend his whole life in Nema. From their front porch, Frank and Jewel would watch the town's rise and fall. People who believed hard work and long hours would pay off. How come you stopped being a water boy and changed jobs?
Well, say that your job paid 10 cents a day more than mine, I'd go looking for your job.
The jobs came in 1881 when Wisconsin loggers moved north across Lake Michigan's Big Badenoch to Nema, drawn by the massive stands of virgin pine. Soon the Badenoch Lumber Company would expand this tiny outpost along the Sturgeon River, building Nema piece by piece.
That's the president of the company, Mr. Good. That's Bill Acker. He's a general manager.
Rudy Yane joined Badenoch as paymaster and bookkeeper in the early 30s, and over the years he'd handle a movie camera instead of a peavey or an axe.
They have a chain brake system on it. Those that don't want to go are encouraged with it by a pike pole. And there's what they call the bolt chain. That takes the lumber of the logs upstairs, because all the lumber is manufactured on the second floor. The exhaust from the generating system goes into the water. If it becomes ice, they can't handle the logs. There's the hardwood lumber inspector. That was Dave Phelan. This is softwood, hemlock. I just merely took this because old Fat Turek was up there, and I was sure he was going to fall over backwards, but he didn't.
NEMA was alive then, and men moved over the mill and lumber piles like ants, doing everything from sawing logs to loading barges to repairing locomotives.
It was hard work because generally if you worked in the mill, machinery and steam was pushing you, so there was no goofing off. You either done your work or they had somebody else take your place that would do it. So that was Jenny, that was Peanuts, and that was Blondie.
Still on a first-name basis with the mules that used to haul lumber, Vern Ward remembers starting at 25 cents an hour, 10 hours a day. He also remembers the day when Hosias King got his sleeve caught in the gears near the mill's transfer chain.
And it kept pulling, and it pulled his arm right out. It pulled it right from his body. That was the worst accident I ever seen. And they put him in a dump cart with a team and took him up here at the hospital.
Hosias King would live, but Ivan Schaefer's 12-year-old brother would not, killed while playing on a log pile. Things could happen in a hurry in those days, as cold winds often swept in off the bay. Men hauled lumber with a horse or mule in a small cart high up on the tramways. Trams, they used to say, were held up by frost in the winter, quackgrass in the summer.
I got on the tram there, and all of a sudden I heard a noise, but I couldn't tell what it was. And all of a sudden, 150, 200 feet of tramway went down. And the horse, and the load, me, and the whole doggone thing went down with it.
You go in the water. He took a good bite on it, too, I tell you that, really.
George Blowers cradles a fishing pole these days within the shadow of where the mill once stood. Those same hands used to file the giant saws to a sharp edge. Today, it's a forgotten art.
It's a technique job, but you didn't learn that one day. It took a long time to learn it. And see that it was set up right, and if you didn't file it right, it'd break.
When they bring them in at night, they'd stop at the water trough out there, the horses would get their drink, and in they'd come and they knew right where to go. They'd go to their own stall.
Bino Mercier says he can still picture the horses. Some were massive animals that pulled the huge logging wheels used in the earliest days in the woods. Today, the giant barns where the animals were kept are ready to collapse. So is the home where Bino grew up with 7 brothers and sisters. Gone now is the separate summer kitchen and back where Mom could bake without cooking the whole house. Bino's father was a jack of all trades for Badenoch, from blacksmith to master machinist. There were no phones in Nema then, but with the mill generating the town's limited electricity, Bino's father was always within reach.
One way they would get them was by, if it was in the evening and they needed them for something, all they'd do is blink the lights twice. Of course, everybody's blinked. Everybody knew what it was for, so.
From telephones to electricity, it was a time when every day brought another invention to this generation. Nema started with no running water, just a town well and a delivery wagon. Homes had eaves troughs to catch the rain. To get around, you walked, and folks say Doc Somerville had the first car. You could get ice for the ice box, but refrigerators didn't do much good with the electricity from the mill shut off at bedtime.
You'd have to be careful because when you were up at the clubhouse and they turned the lights out at 10:30 and you go up the road, you might stumble over somebody's cow laying in the middle of the road.
For years, those dirt roads were filled in with sawdust, or hog fuel as it was called. It helped the potholes, but it also fed fires. Flames were always a threat, and through the decades, fires destroyed the mill twice and the clubhouse several times, as well as the store and many homes. In 1921, flames raced down the streets, leveling 19 buildings in just one fire. When the smoke cleared, Badenoch embraced progress and installed hydrants on each block and ladders nearby. Roundhouse fires were another danger. One spring, several locomotives in for maintenance were wiped out. And in another fire, the stage was set for a rescue by one brakeman who backed into the flames and pulled out an engine.
He had a lucky streak. He got on there and he went in there with it, set the knuckles, and he caught it. Everybody pretty well knows what the score is, and they act accordingly.
The men would climb on board another train during the Dust Bowl days and fight fire at one of Betanock's logging camps in the woods. But excitement like that was the exception in the camps, where hard work and monotony were the rule, cutting timber and hauling logs all winter and getting paid $1 a day.
The most honest man I ever knew was a lumberjack.
Honest men who put in an honest day's work. Henry Peanut Sargent looks back at his years in the woods and says with a chuckle, it was almost self-imprisonment.
We'd consider it a jail now, but we used to go to the woods in the fall and stay there till April, and we didn't have TV or even a newspaper. But I don't know, we liked it for $30 a month. And our book.
Once again, Rudy Yane got out of the office with his camera and headed to one of the Betanock camps, where hundreds of men spent their winters.
Now they're taking that Camp 26, John Stemick. Some of these are old timers. There's old Ed Blake. And those fellows had axes, they could shave with them. That's a big tree. It takes a long time to get the notch in it. This is before the advent of the chainsaw. This is the way the logs were cut down, the trees were cut down. And the next operation was to get those logs out of the woods along the sleigh haul road, and it was a close call for the fellow that broke that load. He got out in time. This was that morning when I told you it was 25 below. Those cars had been loaded down there overnight. The journals were cold, and it's quite a hill. They couldn't make it with one haul. They had to back down and take a second run. And it wasn't a problem with steam. You see the safety valve was popping.
Steam-powered locomotives were modern miracles to turn-of-the-century loggers who, until then, had relied on horses, spring runoff, and great river drives to move logs. That often meant building dams in the woods, holding back the melting water, and flushing the logs downstream at the crucial moment.
And we'd have 5 or 6 feet of water flowing in this direction. And all the logs would be coming through, and on either side of us here, there'd be men along the edges of the sluiceway with peavies, pike poles, maneuvering the logs, keeping them from, jamming up against each other. And they'd all flow through here and down into the main channel, the Sturgeon River, and be on their way down to the mill at Nema. Here is really pretty well preserved because it's been buried in this muck here, so the oxygen, can't get to it.
Orphaned logs that were cut and marked but never made it to the mill. Moss-covered timbers, rusting spikes. Deep in the woods, they all tell the story of a life 100 years ago. Archaeologist John Franzen spots that life where most of us see nothing but forest, pioneer dams and sluiceways, where men once channeled water and moved logs, are now lost in the vegetation.
I'd call them folk technologists. There was no engineering degrees. The loggers themselves built all the dams, just based on their experience and their knowledge of, the woods and the way the rivers flowed. And they made their own calculations.
When the men were done for the day, they returned to camp to eat, sleep, and relax.
Where the huskies howl at the northern light.
I would be 90% certain this is the bunkhouse.
Today, only earthen berms remain, early insulation for walls that have long since disappeared. Only grasses have managed to grow in the clearing where men and horses trampled the soil around the time of World War I. Camps filled with the voices of men and the smell of dinner.
Okay, they would take the food out of the root cellar, carry it through the door here, and out into this area, which is the cookhouse. When the cook and his helpers are hauling 100-pound bags of potatoes and things like that, they don't want to go very far to bring those to where they're preparing dinner. So one pattern we see in the camps over and over again is the root cellar is in a reasonable proximity to the cookhouse.
Along with abandoned root cellars and earthen berms around bunkhouses are even more vivid reminders of what was once a small city of men, whether it be parts of kerosene lanterns, an old boot, a bed spring, or just part of a coffee pot.
Here we have some of the tableware. They use this cheap metal tableware in a lot of the camps. They used a lot of the so-called, patent medicines and compounds that the guys would take when they got sick.
If the early elixirs didn't help, maybe a luxury like a Finnish steam bath would. Finns and their saunas were common at several Badenoch camps.
Camps with a lot of Finns had a reputation as being one of the cleaner places to work. It was about the only good opportunity for the loggers to get a bath during the winter.
But it was mealtime, not bath time, that lumberjacks savored most. In camp, food was king. And Rudy said men signing on in the fall often had just one question.
Who's cooking? Little George. Okay, okay. No problem. Little George Sherlock. Just short little fellow, but he laid out the food that the fellows liked.
Some loggers even moved from camp to camp until they found good food, but the rules were always the same. No talking. It wasted time.
Never allowed to speak. In the big camps, 125 men in, you could hear a pin drop at mealtime.
Eventually, the long winter came to an end. The spring breakup arrived, and the lumberjacks headed to town.
They used to have a saloon here, and when the lumberjacks came down from the woods, they saved their money all winter, and then they spent it in one night at the saloon right next to the rooming house.
Whether lumberjacks or townsfolk, everyone shared one thing, the same boss, the Badenoch Company. But as company towns go, most residents remember Nema as a good one.
Nobody went hungry.
No, the company
There wasn't any welfare, of course, but you didn't have to have any. The Badenoch fed you.
Nema had a clubhouse. Can you imagine that? That was the only one I ever seen. Yeah.
Badenoch's reach extended to every corner of Nema. The company owned it all, the beach, the ball field, the hotel, the hospital, and 102 houses. Houses the company rented out at $6 to $15 a month.
Remember now, you could get lard for 4 pounds for 28 cents. You could get coffee 3 pounds for 39 cents. I mean, like I said, food was cheap, but that's right.
From lard to underwear, folks headed to the company store. Clothes for the whole family, medicine for the body, kerosene for the lamp. One-stop shopping for Mom, the kids, and Grandpa. Everything from saws to birthday cards. The clerk then grabbed the ledger book and penciled in what you owed for sugar, coffee, potatoes, cotton for sewing, and yeast for bread. Long before credit cards, your account was tallied up at the end of the month, and your take-home pay was whatever was left.
There was a column for rent, for water, for lights, for doctor fees. A married man paid $2 a month doctor fee. And everything but major surgery was taken care of on that, see.
It was here at the company pay window where everyone picked up their wages, whether it be the logger finally getting paid after weeks or months in the woods, or the missus, wanting to make sure she got her hands on the money before her husband did.
Brother, can you spare a dime? Once I built a tower.
The money was scarce during the Depression when Badenoch issued its own currency and some credit in the form of coupon books redeemable at the company store. Another sign of Badenoch's grip on the town, a grip that some remember as not being equal.
It all depended who you were. Well, they had the rich and the poor. That's pretty knock idea.
Yeah. Oh, Ivan, don't knock them down.
They had their
That was true, Violet.
That's true. Now, you know it's true. Your husband had a good job.
Yeah,
We
that's
don't
true.
want that advertised.
There was
Well, I
some
don't care.
elites in the town, no doubt.
As one resident put it, only the big shots had indoor plumbing, and some people could buy at the company store at 10% over cost. Even the front porches built by out-of-work men in the 30s revealed something about a company town. Rudy recalls the first one.
They build that porch. In the meantime, these other guys go down and say, I want to have a porch too. So, and that's what happens in the company town. One wants it, the other one wants it, see?
Bino says there were pros and cons, but figures the bottom line came down to a paycheck, company town or not.
Say they don't like the company, but do they really? I mean, I don't know. If the company isn't there, they're not working, so they don't like that either, do they?
Badenoch may have owned Nema, but it was always the timber that owned them both. And after 70 years, the great trees were disappearing.
People thought that they were never going to run out of forest.
Us fellows that were driving, we could see how fast that timber was going down up there.
By 1950, men like Fred Clement were driving 100 miles a day hauling logs to the mill. Badenoch had slowly moved up the Sturgeon River and across the UP, but its acreage was dwindling and more timber was too far away. In the end, dollars and cents defeated any nostalgia over an old lumber town.
The stock always says, well, I got the stock from my dad, and my dad got it from his dad. We all got our cuts out of it. Let's just make one big distribution, sell it and make a distribution and fold it up. That's how they ended it.
In 1951, the axe fell on Nema. Charlie Good watched as the last barge load of lumber moved out, and July 26th, the last log was cut.
There was lots of tears in the dishpans. The ladies were washing the dishes. It happened right after the noon hour.
What do you do? Blow a whistle or ring a bell or what when
They blew a long whistle.
Yeah.
When the last log was cut.
Yeah, the last log was kind of sad then.
It was over. The tramways were torn down and sawed into lumber. Miles of train track were ripped up and sold for scrap. The engines went to other railroads, and the giant saw to a mill in the Pacific Northwest. Like countless lumber towns before it, Nema had served its purpose. But before it faded away, company president Charlie Good tried to save Nema by selling it, the whole town, the houses, the golf course, the club, the beach. The story ran in newspapers and magazines from coast to coast. At $250,000, the headline said Nema was a bargain. And when the world came for a look, lifelong residents knew that more than just the buildings were being sold.
We were on exhibition that day that everybody came here looking over the town. There were people who were coffin makers and God knows what else, you know, running around through here. And we were sort of on sale ourselves, like, that's the way you felt it, you know.
The uncertainty gave way to relief a few months later. Charlie Good found a buyer in Warren Miller, head of the American Playground Device Company out of Indiana. Rudy says the deal was clinched when the chef at the Nema Hotel served up a black bass Miller caught nearby.
They had bass for their noon meal. Afterwards, he told me several times, you know, that bass was an awful expensive bass I caught.
The laughter came with the feeling Nema had been rescued. American Playground would only employ 50 people to start, but President Miller talked of a resort town, and there was hope.
And they had like an open house that one night everything was free. All the ice cream and the beer that men wanted, everything was free to them.
You know, there's something that's going to bring us through, I said, and take us out of a slump and get us to going, whatever, really.
After a lifetime in the sawmill, even Frank Sefcik was ready for life after Badenoch.
Well, I don't know how to say this, but I was tickled to death to see him go.
While Frank was looking for a change and the town had hope, the revival of Nema would never come. Over the next 20 years, Miller did spruce up the town. Fences were painted, the hotel remodeled. American Playground even moved its entire operation here in the late 60s. But plagued with shipping problems and eventually canceled orders, the company returned to Indiana, leaving behind only a handful of employees. And NEMA's death continued. A once proud school turned to crumbled ruins symbolized the end. The children, the families were gone. But even today, NEMA does not yet rest in peace. Randy Coates is the newest president of American Playground. He spent summers growing up in NEMA, and his dreams include a campground, maybe a resort, and cutting some of the trees.
The glory is having everybody have an economically stable community and to really make this community be active again.
It's an old and familiar theme, greeted with both optimism and worry.
I like to see it back to where it used to be years ago. Years ago, you know, it used to be about 700-800 people around here, and for us kids, we could raise hell every night. We'd had about 40-50 kids to play with.
They say it's progress and you have to make money, you know, so that's what they're doing.
But then still, whoever owns the town is paying the ticket, aren't they?
And I like it here. And I don't want it to change. I told you two fellas that. I want the town to stay the same.
I think he's going to make it. It's going to boom.
But NEMA has not boomed for 40 years, and it's unlikely it ever will again. In some ways, the town stands like another landmark left by other loggers in the UP, the Kingston Plains. A barren stretch of land that once supported its own majestic pines, but loggers swept through in the 1890s. Intense fires soon followed. And 100 years later, only the stumps remain, grave markers for a once great forest. NEMA has its own markers, those who made the town what it was, mothers and great-grandfathers. They gave life to NEMA, living at a time when everything seemed possible. Today, the life is gone, the sawmill only a memory. Those who built NEMA are forgotten, and the few who remain are fading.
Face up to it, that life is very, very short. It's very short. And even if you live to be 88 years old, as Alex French Seymour did, the man I buried Saturday night, even if you live to be 88, life is still short. It's very short.
Those buried here look up at a pair of white pines, trees that once seemed to stretch forever, trees many thought would last forever. But the trees disappeared, and someday, NEMA will too.
Well, I don't know. It's okay with me. I don't know, ghost town or not. I like it. I always did.
Does your memory stray to a bright summer day when I kissed you and called you sweetheart? Do the chairs in your parlor seem empty and bare? Do you gaze at your doorstep and picture me there? Is your heart